This is the Cancer Interviews podcast, and I'm your host, Bruce Morton. Our guest on this episode twice survived blood cancer, but then his journey unexpectedly took a wrong turn. However, he has battled through a disability, and a big part of his survivorship is that he can run a marathon. As a matter of fact, he's run more than 30 marathons and half marathons. He is Boyd Dunleavy of Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada, and this is his story. So here he is, and Boyd, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Boyd, the first thing we want to do is learn a little bit more about you, because quite obviously there's more to your life than a cancer journey. So if you would, tell us a bit about where you're from, when you work, what you do for work, and when you have fun, what you do for fun.
So ironically, I do live in Moncton, New Brunswick now. I grew up in Vancouver, met my wife overseas in Australia actually years ago, and she was from Ontario. Actually from Toronto. So we got married, lived in Toronto for a year, and from there moved to London, Ontario in 2002. We had 3 kids in 6 years. I was a banker, a mortgage broker. Thought I was physically active as a slightly overweight mortgage broker, golfing a couple times a month and active with community, church, and things like that. And, you know, we thought life was kind of hectic and chaotic, and you know, Canada Day of 2011, our lives took a dramatic turn with the blood cancer diagnosis, which would have been July 1st of 2011. So what do I currently do for work? I'm on medical disability. So over the years, I've spent time volunteering. I've won awards for speaking with organizations like the Canadian Cancer Society and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And so right now, thank you to coming out of COVID, the cancer community has gotten really smart, and there's a lot of online support networks. And so I help participate in about 10 different cancer support groups throughout the month and facilitate about 4 a month. So that's what I do to keep busy. We love the community here, keeping busy with church, kids. Our oldest son just graduated high school, and you know, the 3 kids in 6 years are now teenagers, and so it's incredibly busy. But we're just thrilled to still be alive, active, and doing quite well in spite of everything we've been through. So,
Boyd, for all of us who are cancer survivors, there was a point in which things went from normal to abnormal. When did you first notice that physically something wasn't quite right?
I was experiencing night sweats, nosebleeds. It's really funny. I went for where they do the needles. I can't think of the word, acupuncture. And normally it's totally fine. And for whatever reason, I was bleeding from the needles, which are very small. And so the guy's like, there's something not right. And I just thought it was because, you know, we had 3 kids in 6 years and life was incredibly busy with work, and I wasn't feeling well. And so I randomly went to my doctor, and she ordered blood work. And that's when we had the terrible news that you need to get in the hospital right away. She suspected that it was something horrible. My platelets had dropped to the 20s or 30s, something awful. And so I was admitted to the hospital pretty much that day. And that's when, you know, they said you have blood cancer.
Everybody is different, Boyd. Their diagnosis is different. We're not going to ask if this was a bad day. Obviously, it was a bad day. But different people they have a different makeup, different persona, and so they react in different ways. When you got this horrific news, how did you react?
I just said, we got to get through this. We have to fight. And the determination of others really kind of propelled me into the type of person that I am today. I was always very passionate and trying to be excited with life, but it wasn't even the diagnosis. Just first, second, third round of chemotherapy, we're fighting with systems, you know, just nurses not doing their job. I had an infection that almost killed me. My wife said this week, if she hadn't intervened 3 separate occasions, I would have died. And I guess the compounding difficult news was 3 months later, the hematologist came in and said, you have acute myeloid leukemia 6-9. It's such a rare type of blood cancer. We've never heard of it. If you don't have a life-saving stem cell transplant, you're going to be dead within a year. And something inside of me is just like, no, nope, don't think so. I said, I got a guy. He said, who's your guy? I said, the Lord Jesus. He'll determine whether I live or die. And that really was kind of the determining factor for me that, no, this was not going to kill me. And so something inside of me just rose up and said no.
By the way, we're confident you'll be able to learn some tips and tools to help you through your personal cancer journey. But first, we'd like to invite you to please give us a like, leave a comment or review below, and share this story with your friends. And we'd also like to ask you to kindly click on the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so you'll be notified when we release our next cancer interview. And if you or a loved one are facing a cancer diagnosis, please click on the link in the description and show notes below to check out our free guide, The Top 10 Things I Wish I Knew When I First Got Cancer. Now, to get back to your story, Boyd, first you went on the chemotherapy, which is never fun for anybody. What was the toughest part of that treatment? And you had mentioned nurses not doing their job. So if you might mix that in as well. In other words, there's chemo, and it sounds like part of your care team wasn't doing as well as they could have or should have.
Just almost falling through the cracks of the system is how I would put it. You've got shifts changing. You've got people coming on, other people going off shift, not paying attention to what was going on, fevers, infections, etc. And, over those 3 months, they're like, here we are, we're going to refer you to a different hospital for the transplant. And then some clerk in a hospital in Toronto just sat on my file for months. And so February of 2012, my cancer relapsed because of somebody's incompetence. And so it just went on and on and on like a bad story. And February 17th, again, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds of chemo. God supernaturally intervened. I had a vision of Jesus being flogged before his crucifixion, and the scripture in Isaiah, which says, by his stripes we are healed. And 2 nights after that, I supernaturally just vomited the cancer out of myself. And I knew I was in remission. The only way they can determine if you have blood cancer or not is through a bone marrow biopsy. And I've had about 5 of those. And I just knew I was in remission. And so I had actually gone with my son out to Vancouver to see my family out there. I was already in Vancouver when they called to say I was in remission. So that was kind of a sort of mic drop moment, but you have to be in remission to do a transplant. And so we knew they had a donor. And so we just weren't interested in that hospital. So my wife Googled and found the Juravinski Stem Cell Transplant Hospital in Hamilton, Ontario, which is near Toronto. And they had beds. They were ready to rock and roll. So May 3rd of 2012 was my life-saving stem cell transplant from an unrelated donor.
And there's a great story, Boyd, with respect not only to the transplant, which we want to hear about, but about the person that made it happen, the donor. If you could tell us about both.
Yeah, so the transplant was by far the hardest thing I've ever been through. The closest analogy I can talk about is the movie Wolverine, where it came out, I think, in 2009. He goes through this process of having adamantium fused to his bones. It was just horrific. And it was about 2.5 weeks of that. It was just beyond horrible. That was the hardest thing I've ever faced in my life. Get through that, come home, brain injury, spinal cord trauma, just from the year of chemo. But to answer your question, the coolest part about all that is we found out it was a gentleman named Nathan Barnes. Nathan is an American naval serviceman. And we found out years later that the US Navy flew him from Japan to America to get his DNA to save my life. Which is just awesome. But between the transplant in 2012, connecting with him in 2013, I had to live. They weren't going to connect me with him if I didn't live. And so getting through all those things was just, we could probably talk for 2 hours about that. And so people praying, people believing for me, and even just relearning how to walk up and down stairs was a huge step for me. And one of the most interesting things was in the spring of 2013, a friend approached me about taking me to Alaska, and he took me to Alaska and ran a marathon for me with the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. It changed my life. I bought a pair of shoes and started running in spite of the brain trauma, in spite of the spinal cord injury, in spite of the balance issues, in spite of all those things. And it literally changed my life. I mean, Nathan is the person that saved my life, but I've had multiple friends just intervene and say, hey, come with us, come get active. And so I'll just pause for a second because you probably want to jump in, but it's been an amazing story from there.
Boyd, I want to go back to what resulted from the chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. And because it's just part of our interviews that we ask, well, when did things start becoming abnormal, et cetera, et cetera. But when did any sort of brain or spinal cord issue manifest itself?
Well, so first round of chemotherapy, I developed these balance issues, and the team completely missed it. They didn't know what it was. They're like, what's wrong with you? And they're doing spinal taps and everything else. And so the chemotherapy poisoned my brainstem. And again, you're just trying to live. And so you're going from process to process. And the following spring from the stem cell transplant, I got a virus called Transverse Myelitis. I had no immune system. And so that presented in the form I was trying to eat spaghetti and my face went numb, rushed to emergency. They, again, misdiagnosed it. They thought it was a bladder infection. They stuck a catheter in and sent me home. They could have put me on a steroid to prevent all of this. And so that's when they discovered afterwards that there was also a brain injury on top of the nerve damage to the neck and the lower back. And so just Bruce, the funniest thing was I got a letter in the mail asking how was the service from the hospital. And I actually filled it in and sent it in. Somebody called, they were just shocked. Like, I'm so sorry. You know, hey, blood cancer twice in 8 months, have your cancer relapse, have brain and spinal cord injury. How did it go? And they connected me with somebody who was the head of the ER. His name was Dr. Jaber. And I remember talking to him. This would have been November of 2012. And he just apologized. And I didn't feel like it, but as Christians, we're supposed to forgive. And I said, sir, I'm just going to choose to forgive, even though I don't feel like doing this right now. And looking back years later, Bruce, I didn't even realize it at the time. I was able to get off of the majority of the medication that I was on. So other than medication for nerve damage and some indigestion, you know, a brain injury and spinal cord trauma and some issues with my vision, it was a perfect transplant. I say it with humor because otherwise it's just sad and depressing, right? Like all of the nonsense that I went through just to survive. And I have friends that have done way better, and I have friends that have gone way worse. And I've also been to a lot of funerals of people that didn't even make it. So people say, what's your motto? I say, cracked but not broken. Cracked but not broken.
Boyd, now I want to talk about the transplant itself. Obviously, your newly found friend Nathan stepped up in the biggest way imaginable, but there was still the transplant that needed to take place. Could you say that the transplant was executed better than the previous phase of your care plan? In other words, was the transplant executed better than the chemotherapy?
Well, the chemotherapy, the goal is to get it into remission. When they give you the treatments for the transplant, if it doesn't work, you die. So the stakes are much higher. And so it worked because it worked. It wasn't like, oh, it didn't work, let's try it again. You can't do another transplant. Like that's how high the stakes were. It was like, this is the point in your life that if it doesn't work, then you're dead. So yeah, they did a great job. I'm still alive. It's still alive. It was the fumbling of the hospital that was my home hospital, not this one out of town, that caused all of the ongoing health issues. But you know, choosing to forgive, and we haven't touched on this yet, but just because of my disability, I qualified to run the Boston Marathon under their Athletes with Disabilities program. I've run it 4 times in person, so I made the best of a horrible situation.
Now, I have to ask you this, taking just a few seconds to talk about myself. I used to be a runner myself. I ran distances, but I never ran a marathon because I was scared off by all the the voluminous amount of training that it would take to do it.
Yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting.
And I didn't have a disability. So you had a disability, and you made it to the point that you could run a marathon.
Yes,
That
sir.
in and of itself impresses the heck out of me. And for anybody who's watching or listening who has run, it's going to impress them. So tell us a bit about the process that you went through from virtually zero to getting to a point in which you could run a marathon. If you would address that from a mental and physical standpoint.
Somebody said I would never run Boston. And that was are you kidding? God healed me of cancer. I've been through a transplant. I'm not going to get into Boston. So the mental determination, the toughness, the strength, the resiliency. 2016 was my first Boston, and it was just finishing. It was an amazing moment. And I ran into a gentleman named Bill Rogers who had won Boston like 4 times, just at a race in Flint, Michigan. He's like, Boyd, your story's amazing. And from there, I decided, my wife's like, you should go back. You had so much fun. And 2017 was an amazing moment. I had a 25-minute personal best at Boston. It was the 5-year anniversary of my transplant, which they said, with the transplant, I had a 30% chance of living to 5 years. So did that, was, singing Victory in Jesus at the end of the marathon, and found out after the fact that I had beat the individual that said I would never run Boston by a minute that day. That just blew my mind. This person was way faster than me. And so just determination, hard work. I mean, I can look back on the amount of training that I did starting in 2013, even to today. You put in the hard work, you go with what works for you. For me, I do a lot of training now on a treadmill because of the fact of my balance issues. It's much less dangerous than running outside or risking getting hit by a car, and running at night where my vision's not as good as it used to be. And so, you just do your thing well, and it works. I don't know. I mean, you meet people that run ultra marathons. So there's always kind of the next thing, but marathons are really hard. My favorite distance by far is a half marathon. I think I've raced 21 to 24 of those. Those are just, my disabilities don't show up during a half marathon. That's how well my training has gone over the last 10 years of running. But during a marathon, my body starts falling apart after mile 20. I get ataxia, which is difficulty walking straight. I look like a drunk man. I'm allowed a guide runner during the major marathons. I'm kind of stumbling around. I take my nerve inhibitor medication during the marathon. It's quite a process. It feels like I'm on a unicycle, but somehow we get there with God's grace. We hit the 26.2 miles. So.
Boyd, the following is a yes/no question, and I'm pretty sure I already know what the answer is going to be to this, but I still want to hear it in your words. Is there any link between the mental toughness needed to battle cancer and the mental toughness needed to complete 26.2 miles?
It's a yes. It's 100% yes. That was the, okay, if I can get through this, I can get to this. Because of the fortitude and the determination of coming through cancer. It's never just a marathon. It's never just a 5K. It's never just a half marathon, but it's not cancer. It's not cancer.
And how can that mental toughness be beneficial to you going forward in all aspects of life?
Well, in the past, I allowed people to comment on my life or get on my case for being on a disability. You kind of got to toughen up and say, it's none of your concern. I'm responsible for me, my family, and my children's well-being. And if the doctors haven't cleared me to return to work, it's none of your concern. And just kind of that toughness. I don't go around looking for arguments or whatever, but just that, Steve Rogers, Captain America, the Avengers, he's my hero. He's just, when you got to stand, you stand. When you got to be strong, you strong. Like a tree, you don't bend. So I've been watching it the last week. It's just like, yes, it's yes. Just determination.
Our guest is Boyd Dunleavy of Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada. And he's a 2-time survivor of blood cancer. And he has undergone a successful stem cell procedure, and he's also fought back against some nasty consequences from his first chemotherapy phases of his procedure. And at this point, Boyd, we're gonna wrap things up, and we're gonna wrap things up with a form of a question we usually wrap things up on, and that is, if somebody has just been diagnosed with blood cancer, or maybe even your rare form of blood cancer, if you had a private audience with them, there might be a lot of things you would want to share with them. But if there's one thing that is overarching, one thing that is the most important thing you want to make sure resonates with this person, what would it be?
Get away from the negative people, whether it's you, whether it's family. You got to live. You have to live. So get away from whatever is negative. If it's a medical system, find a different hospital. We literally consulted 3 different hospitals. Find the positive. If you're a believer in God, draw on that faith in God. If you're just having doubt, just surround yourself with, there were people that believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. So I stand on the shoulders of many strong people that came before me.
And just one other piece with that I would like to ask you about, and that is the advocacy piece. It sounds like your wife really stepped up in a big way. Could you just talk about the importance of advocacy in this, and not swallowing whole the opinions of your doctors?
They're not God. They have a God complex, and I struggle with, I have tremendous respect for those that have earned my respect, and those that are well-meaning. Those that are arrogant or incompetent, I don't have patience for anymore. You have to advocate, and when people tell you no, you push back. I mean, my wife just over and over and over again had to push back, and she's a very introverted person, and she doesn't talk a lot about it publicly, but just having to say, no, he's not doing well. You need to do something. You keep talking until you find a voice of somebody that's willing to listen. So I hope that is a good answer to what you're asking.
That's an outstanding answer, and it's an outstanding, inspiring story that you've shared with us, Boyd. So we want to thank you very much. Really appreciate it, and wish you the very best on the race course and on the race course of life as you deal with it. Thanks very much for being with us on Cancer Interviews.
Absolute pleasure today, Bruce. It's been wonderful getting to know you. All the best.
Thank you. And that's going to wrap up this edition of Cancer Interviews. We want to remind you that if you or a loved one are on a cancer journey, as Boyd has mentioned, you are not alone. There's plenty of avenues of support out there to get you through this potentially very difficult time. So until next time, we'll see you on down the road.